Sawadee Kap, hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying volume 13 of our book series, which is titled Generosity. We're studying chapters 81 through 89. This is the last class of this iteration of the Pali Canon and English study group. I'm going to be sharing with you guys these 9 chapters, and then next week on Saturday, we're going to be starting from the very beginning. So on January 10th, we'll be starting with volume 2, chapters 1 through 10, and I'm going to go through all the books again through the year-and-a-half training of helping you guys to understand the path to enlightenment through the original words of the Buddha. So welcome to all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you've been joining regularly. The way that this program works is a bit different than the other programs that I share, where the other programs I teach for like 15, 20, 30 minutes, and then I open up for questions and then teach another 15, 20, 30 minutes and open up for questions. In this program, what I do is I invite students who are in Zoom to be able to read a chapter from the book, which these chapters are typically pretty short. Then I will share some teachings on that. And then I'm going to open up to any and all questions that you have, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. You can ask questions by putting that into the comment section. And then if you're in Zoom, you can also electronically raise your hand, unmute your microphone, and ask any and all questions that you like that way. So if there's anybody in Zoom who would like to volunteer to read this first chapter, you can just electronically raise your hand, unmute your microphone, and then you'll be able to read the chapter. Okay, I don't see anybody raising their hand unless, there we go, Samantha. I was going to say, unless the technology is not working. All right, go ahead, Samantha. It looks like Pat's next.
Okay, I think Pat gave that to me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he does usually open up, doesn't he?
Okay, chapter 81, developing and cultivating a mind of loving kindness and practicing the way to the ascetic. 1. In that case, monk, you should train yourself thus. My mind will be firm and well settled internally. Arisen evil, unwholesome states will not obsess my mind. Thus should you train yourself. When, monk, your mind is firm and well settled internally, and arisen evil, unwholesome states do not obsess your mind, then you should train yourself thus. I will develop and cultivate the liberation of the mind by loving kindness, make it a vehicle and basis, carry it out, consolidate it, and properly undertake it. Thus you should train yourself. One monk, this concentration has been developed and well developed by you in this way, then you should train yourself thus. I will develop and cultivate the liberation of the mind by compassion, the liberation of the mind by sympathetic joy, the liberation of the mind by equanimity. Make it a vehicle and basis, carry it out, consolidate it, and properly undertake it. Thus should you train yourself. 2. He sees himself purified of all these evil, unwholesome states. He sees himself liberated from them. When he sees this, joyfulness is born in him. When he is joyful, joy is born in him. In one who is joyous, the body becomes tranquil. One whose body is tranquil feels pleasure. In one who feels pleasure, the mind becomes concentrated. He resides filling one quarter with a mind filled with loving kindness, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth. So above, below, around, and everywhere, and to all as to himself, he resides filling the all-encompassing world with a mind filled with loving kindness, abundant, distinguished, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. He resides filling one quarter with a mind filled with compassion, with a mind filled with sympathetic joy, with a mind filled with equanimity, abundant, distinguished, immeasurable, without hostility, and without ill will. Suppose there were a pond with clear, agreeable, cool water, transparent with smooth banks, delightful. If a man, scorched and exhausted by hot weather, weary, parched, and thirsty, came from the east or from the west or from the north or from the south, or from where you will, having come upon the pond, he would quench his thirst and his hot weather fever. So too, monks, if anyone from a clan of nobles goes forth from the home life into homelessness, and after encountering the teachings and discipline proclaimed by the Tathagata, develops loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, and thereby gains internal peace, Then, because of that internal peace, he practices the proper way to the ascetic, I say. 3. Just as if a mighty trumpeter were with little difficulty to make a proclamation to the four quarters, so by this cultivation and development, Vasetta, by this liberation of the mind through loving kindness, through compassion, through sympathetic joy, through equanimity, he leaves nothing untouched, nothing unaffected in the sensuous sphere. 4. Monks, when the liberation of the mind by loving kindness has been pursued, developed, and cultivated, made a vehicle and basis, carried out, consolidated, and properly undertaken, 11 benefits are to be predicted. What 11? 1 sleeps well. 1 awakens with joy. 1 does not have bad dreams. 1 is pleasing to human beings. 1 is pleasing to spirits. Heavenly beings protect 1. Fire, poison, and weapons do not injure 1. 1's mind quickly becomes concentrated. 1's facial complexion is serene. 1 dies unconfused. And if 1 does not penetrate further, 1 fares on to the Brahma world. 1 monk's the liberation of the mind by loving kindness has been repeatedly pursued, developed, and cultivated, made a vehicle and basis, carried out, consolidated, and properly undertaken. These 11 benefits are to be predicted.
All right. Thank you, Samantha. So here the Buddha is talking about the Brahma Viharas, or the 4 healthy mental states. I've taught these at many times, and I suspect that most of you guys have learned this from me before. So if you'd like me to go into detail about the 4 healthy mental states and what they are and what they remedy, you can let me know and I'll teach that to you. But I thought instead I'm going to focus on the 11 benefits that the Buddha shared. If you haven't learned in Volume 1, Chapter 14, that's where I share the Brahma Viharas, or the 4 healthy mental states, and I explain what each one of them are and what they're actually antidoting. Because this is where the Buddha gets the kind of reputation of being like a doctor, where there's a certain symptom in the mind and then there's a prescription or an antidote, because these 4 healthy mental states are antidoting certain unwholesome mental states that arise in the mind, like anger, hatred, and ill will. Even the slightest dislike, that is eliminated through loving kindness meditation and loving kindness in your day-to-day life, where oftentimes people think that the dislike that they have in their mind is caused by the other person, when in reality it's coming from your own mind. Or things like compassion. This is concern for the misfortune of others. This is antidoting the indifference and the anxiety and worry that one experiences. Then the sympathetic joy is antidoting jealousy and envy. The sympathetic joy is where you have joy for others' success, even if you didn't contribute to it. And then the equanimity is calmness and composure, evenness of temper, especially in a difficult situation. This is antidoting the restlessness of the mind, the overactivity, the anxiety and stress in the mind. So there's details there that it would be helpful for you to be able to learn. But now that we're in Volume 13 and we're at the very last chapter, is the very end of our Pali Canon and English study group, I suspect that most of you guys have already been exposed to that in a detailed way. But what the Buddha is basically helping you to be able to see here is that these 4 healthy mental states are going to liberate the mind, meaning free it up of those discontent feelings. So when the mind is liberated, that's where there's joy in the mind. And when the mind is joyful, what the Buddha is describing here is that the body is tranquil. If you have these little like aches and pains all over the body, not associated with like just physical aspects, but maybe stress or anxiety in the mind, this is where a lot of those aches and pains are coming from. When you have a joyous mind, you'll notice that the body is tranquil, because the mind is the boss and the body is the employee. And if the mind is all bound up with stress and anxiety, that's going to be experienced in the physical body. But when you clean up the mind through eliminating the pollutions of mind, and the mind's experiencing more and more joy, you'll notice that the body's experiencing more and more tranquility as well. And then as we go through this, the Buddha's just talking about cultivating these 4 healthy mental states. And that's what's going to help you to get to liberation of the mind. And when you're liberated the mind, there's going to be these particular benefits, among others, that one will experience. One is that an individual will sleep well. If you think about times where you haven't slept well, what you're normally doing is your mind is kind of obsessively thinking about the past or thinking about the future, and you're laying there in bed kind of ruminating over your thoughts. Your mind can't let go. So by the time that you are training your mind and liberating it with these 4 healthy mental states, you'll notice that your mind is tranquil and it's peaceful, and you'll actually have a good night's sleep every single night. There's no such thing as a bad night's sleep for an individual whose mind is liberated or close to liberation. And then one awakens with joy, meaning as you wake up in the morning, your mind's already joyful. There doesn't need to be any condition met in order for this to occur. That in the unenlightened state, you can only be happy when the mind's getting what it wants based on its craving, desires, attachments. But when you have unconditioned joy or unconditioned happiness, you will awaken from your sleep and the mind will just already be joyful. It'll be bright and cheerful and glad and uplifted. And then also you won't experience bad dreams. That oftentimes that's something that one experiences in the unenlightened state. Then one is pleasing to human beings, because if you're practicing loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, you'll have a lot of ability to interact with human beings harmoniously. So for example, if you weren't practicing sympathetic joy, your mind would be quite jealous and envious. So let's just say you're at work and somebody gets a promotion and you don't, and you find out about this and you're jealous. You're going to be bitter maybe and harsh and hostile towards people, and you're going to have difficulties getting along with people. But when you're practicing these 4 healthy mental states, you'll find that you'll have more and more harmonious relationships with other human beings. So this is one of the benefits of practicing them. Here where the Buddha is talking about being pleasing to spirits, he's talking about afflicted spirits here, that afflicted spirits, of course, they have a certain amount of craving, desire, attachment. Oftentimes people haven't necessarily experienced the independent verification of this realm, but if you have and you know that ghosts essentially exist, that's what the Buddha's talking about. They also have a mind and they interact and they are able to observe and understand what human beings are doing. So not only is an individual pleasing to human beings, practicing these 4 healthy mental states, but also to these afflicted spirits as well. And then the Buddha's talking about being protected by heavenly beings, because heavenly beings actually can influence you. Just like Mara can influence you, so can heavenly beings. They can't make decisions for you, but they can kind of help you along in terms of providing any kind of guidance within one's own mind. And this is what the Buddha is talking about here. When he's talking about that you don't get injured by fire, poison, or weapons, it's not like there's this magical force field over the body, although probably Samantha might be like, darn, David, I thought I was going to get a magical force field and training my mind to get to enlightenment. No, that's not what this is, right? What this is that if you're out in the world doing harm to other people, then that harm that you're putting out is going to come back to you. But if you're not causing harm, if you're practicing the 4 healthy mental states, then you're not putting out harm and harm won't come back to you. That's why you're not being injured by fire, poison, or weapons, because there's not anybody coming towards you with these types of things in order to be able to harm this being. So that's why you're not going to be injured by those things. This is the cause and effect of the natural law of karma. One's mind can become easily concentrated because your mind isn't as polluted when you're practicing these 4 healthy mental states. And you'll notice that your facial complexion is serene. If you've ever looked in the mirror when you're angry or frustrated, your facial expressions do not look serene, right? But when you're joyful inwardly, you'll see that that's apparent in your outward complexion and the way that your facial expressions look. So there's this serenity that's over your face as you are training your mind and your mind is more purified. And then the Buddha talks about one dies unconfused. Being confused is to have lack of wisdom of the natural laws. So if you don't understand the natural laws, you will die confused, right? Of what's next and why things are occurring and what's happening. But if you understand these natural laws and you understand that death is part of the equation here, and when there's death, you're going to know what's going to transpire. If the mind is unenlightened, you're going to experience rebirth. If there's enlightenment, if the mind is experiencing that mental state, then there's no rebirth in the cycle of rebirth. And the Buddha doesn't declare what comes next. But by that time, your mind's so peaceful and joyful in the enlightened mental state, you're not going to care what's next, because in the present moment, you're actually quite peaceful and joyful. So by the time you awaken to these natural laws and you're practicing these 4 healthy mental states, you will have seen the cause and effect relationship with the natural laws, and you will die unconfused. And then lastly, the Buddha says, if one does not penetrate further, one fares on to the Brahma world. What the Buddha is describing in the first part of the discourse, he's not describing a fully enlightened being, someone who's enlightened. He's actually describing someone who's practicing the four healthy mental states. So what he's saying here is if that's as far as you go and you don't actually make it further on the path to actually get to enlightenment, then if you die having practiced the four healthy mental states, then you'll go to this heavenly world. He sometimes referred to it as the Brahma world because Brahma was the way that he referred to God. And this is the world of God. This is the being who is essentially kind of overseeing that realm. So if one does not penetrate further, meaning they don't continue to practice to get to the point where the mind's completely liberated and experiencing enlightenment, then if one falls short, they will potentially be reborn in the heavenly world. But remember, that's not the ideal existence. That's not the goal of these teachings. And what you would like to be able to do is train your mind to get to enlightenment in this life. But if you fall short of that, there is the potential to be reborn into the heavenly world. So let me know what questions you guys have here on these 11 benefits or anything else that we read as part of this discourse. I just didn't see a need to go through all the detail like I normally do because I think most of you guys have actually studied that before. So you can put your questions in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comments section, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So I'm going to move to the next one, which is chapter 82. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Oh, yeah, that's right. It was Pat that raised his hand. Go ahead, sir.
Aspirations are not obtained by means of prayer. Householder, there are these 5 things that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and rarely gained in the world. What 5? 1. Long life, householder, is wished for, desired, agreeable, and rarely gained in the world. 2. Householder, beauty, there are these 5 things that is wished for, desired, agreeable, and rarely gained in the world. 3. Peacefulness, householder, is wished for, desired, agreeable, and rarely gained in the world. 4. Fame, householder, is wished for, desired, agreeable, and rarely gained in the world. 5. The heavens are wished for, desired, agreeable, and rarely gained in the world. These are the 5 things that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and rarely gained in the world. These 5 things, householder, that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and rarely gained in the world, I say, are not obtained by means of prayers or aspirations. If these 5 things that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and rarely gained in the world could be obtained by means of prayers or aspirations, who here would be lacking in anything? 1. Householder, the noble disciple who aspires long life ought not to pray for long life or excited in it, or passively yearn for it. A noble disciple who aspires long life should practice the way conducive to long life. For when he practices the way conducive to long life, it leads to obtaining long life, and he gains long life, either heavenly or human. 2. Householder, the noble disciple who aspires beauty ought not to pray for beauty or excite in it or passively yearn for it. A noble disciple who aspires beauty should practice the way conducive to beauty. For when he practices the way conducive to beauty, it leads to obtaining beauty, and he gains beauty, either heavenly or human. 3. Householder, the noble disciple who aspires peacefulness ought not to pray for peacefulness or excite in it or passively yearn for it. A noble disciple who aspires peacefulness should practice the way conducive to peacefulness. For when he practices the way conducive to peacefulness, it leads to obtaining peacefulness, and he gains peacefulness, either heavenly or human. 4. Householder, the noble disciple who aspires fame ought not to pray for fame or excite in it or passively yearn for it. A noble disciple who aspires fame should practice the way conducive to fame. For when he practices the way conducive to fame, it leads to obtaining fame, and he gains fame, either heavenly or human. 5. Householder, the noble disciple who aspires the heavens ought not to pray for the heavens or excite in them or passively yearn for them. A noble disciple who aspires to heavens to practice the way conducive to heaven. For when he practices the way conducive to heaven, it leads to obtaining the heavens, and he gains the heavens. For one desiring long life, beauty, fame, acclaim, heaven, high families, and lofty delights following in succession, the wise prays motivation in doing deeds of merit. Being motivated, the wise person secures both kinds of good, the good in this life and the good of the future life. By attaining the good, the steadfast one is called one of wisdom. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. So here, this is a really helpful discourse for lots and lots and lots of people. There's many people out there that are praying to either God, or you'll find some people that are even praying to the Buddha, thinking that somehow that by praying that you're going to obtain the things that you need in your day-to-day life. Well, the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that this isn't possible, that this isn't how things are obtained. Because if you understand the natural law of karma, of cause and effect, then you understand anything that you're going to acquire in life, whether it's any of these 5 things or others, it's going to come from making wise decisions to be able to help you to acquire those things. These are 5 things that a lot of people long for and wish for, so the Buddha is calling these out. But there's nothing that you can accomplish in terms of material objects or items that are going to tangibly be in your hands through prayer. And what the Buddha is saying down here is he's saying, if these 5 things are wished for, desired, and agreeable, and rarely gained in the world, could be obtained by means of prayer or aspirations, who here would be lacking in anything? What he's saying is, if it was so easy to acquire the things that you want or you desire in the world through prayer, who among us would actually lack anything at all? Because all we would do is just sit down and pray, and then magically, poof, it would actually happen for us. Some people think that you can do this through prayer. Some people nowadays even think that they can manifest something. You can't manifest something. You can't pray for something and it's just going to magically appear. If you're interested in acquiring any particular aspect in your day-to-day life, you're going to need to be able to apply effort and work and make wise decisions to be able to acquire that. So these are just 5 things that people tend to really want, which is long life, beauty, peacefulness, fame, and the heavens, meaning being reborn in the heavenly world. But you can't obtain these things through prayer. If you're going to have a long life, you're going to need to make wise decisions to get to that long life. Whereas if you went outside and you're bitter and harsh and hostile and argumentative with people, you're punching people in the face, you're stealing things, you're lying, you're doing all kinds of harmful things in the world, you're not going to have a very long life, right? Things are going to happen where you're causing harm and harm is going to come back to you. The same thing with beauty. If somebody would like to have beauty, by being angry and bitter and harsh and hostile, you're going to be the opposite of that. You're not going to experience beauty in your complexion. So the Buddha is saying here that it would be wise to practice the way of long life, beauty, for example, that you're making wise decisions to train the mind. And now as your mind becomes more and more peaceful and joyful, you'll see the complexion of your face is actually more serene or beautiful. Same thing with peacefulness. You can't pray for peacefulness. You can't walk from one part of the world to another part of the world in order to spread peacefulness in the world. If peacefulness is going to happen in the world, each individual person needs to train their mind to be peaceful through wise decisions, not through just, forcing people or trying to convince people through walking from one part of the world to another part of the world and maybe having a peace walk or something like this. It's not possible to produce peace in the world through just a group of people walking from one place to the other. Or protesting. You're not going to create peace just by protesting. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do these types of things. It just means that you need to understand that in order for there to be peacefulness, there needs to be wise decisions in that direction from you to train your mind and practice the way of peacefulness. And the same thing with fame. This is something that people tend to want in the world. But if someone's going to become famous, there's going to need to be decisions that are made in order to move in that direction. And the same thing with the heavens. If somebody really wants to be reborn in the heavenly world, you can't just pray your way to that. You need to be able to practice the way that leads to that. And that's not necessarily something that you should want or aspire for, because that's going to help hold you back from actually attaining enlightenment. But if somebody was truly interested in that, you're not going to get to it through prayer. So the Buddha's not saying that you should long and yearn for these things. He's just saying these are 5 things that people tend to long and yearn for, and they're never going to obtain them through prayer, because it's not prayer that produces these things. It's making wise decisions that lead in this direction. And he's explaining that more closely down here, that if somebody's craving or longing, yearning, or exciting in this long life, the way that you actually get to that is by practicing the way conducive to long life. That's practicing the natural laws. And then the same thing with all these others. So let me know what questions you guys have here, because this really helps to debunk anybody and everybody that's out there praying to the Buddha. I just got back from India and Nepal, where I visited all these sites of the Buddha's life. And there's so many people out there just doing rites, rituals, ceremonies, worship, and prayer, thinking that that's what the Buddha actually taught. And that's not what he actually taught. And you can see it right here in his own words, because you can see the truth around you, that everything that you experience is based in decisions that you make, not based in prayer. So let me know what questions you have. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Samantha has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, Teacher David. I was just wondering if you had heard about the monks doing the peace walk in the United States.
Yes, I have.
So I know that they're not, wishing for peacefulness. They're doing it more as a, to bring awareness to the lack of peacefulness, and I guess the things that are going on in the country and whatnot. I think you've alluded or said in the past that this is a proper way to, I guess, bring attention to things like that and try to bring about change, not wanting it, but just it's a way of helping others to be more aware. Is that correct?
Well, depending on how someone would like to go about it, and if they're interested in experiencing peacefulness in the world, the only way that can occur is if individuals choose to train their mind. And now by uprooting the pollutions in the mind, then those individuals will choose to become more peaceful. So for me, I'm also interested in seeing more and more peacefulness occur in the world. But I know the only way for that to occur is for people to understand these natural laws and train their mind. And then by individuals choosing to do that, that's how the peacefulness is accomplished in the world. So that's why you don't see me out there walking from Chiang Mai to Bangkok or any of these other places in the world doing these walks, because the way that people are actually going to benefit is from the teaching. And that's the best way to be able to share the ability for people to be able to get to peacefulness. And it's not going to be just, one discourse or 1 hour or 2 hours of teaching. It's going to be consistent, ongoing teaching, building up a large community of people who are really steeped in the teachings. That's what's going to actually produce peacefulness. But oftentimes people don't understand that. So they sometimes resort to these kinds of things. And whether people choose to do these kinds of things or not, that's a choice for them to make. But I would help you and others that are interested to be able to see that these kinds of things aren't what's going to lead to peacefulness. In fact, there's actually, some harm that came to those individuals with that car accident, and the one person had their leg amputated and things of this nature, where you can see that this isn't necessarily wise to be walking on the streets of the USA where people aren't used to seeing, large groups of monks walking down the street. And now, this individual experienced that unwholesome result or that unfortunate situation of being in an accident, and now their leg is amputated because of it. So if they're interested in peacefulness, what I would encourage them to consider is doing consistent, ongoing teaching of how to acquire peacefulness, because that's what's going to actually lead to peacefulness, is people training their mind to then be peaceful through uprooting these pollutions out of the mind.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Let me see if we have any other questions here. I don't see any anywhere. Okay, so I'm going to move to this next chapter, which is chapter 83. And while you guys read this, I actually need to go get my charger. I'm on 1%. So if somebody could take over reading this, would somebody like to read it? Okay, looks like Samantha. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. Should a monk be involved with gold and silver? Whatever monk should take gold and silver, or should get another to take it for him, or should consent to its being in deposit for him, there is an offense of expiation involving forfeiture. Whatever monk should engage in various transactions in which gold and silver is used, there is an offense of expiation involving forfeiture. Whatever monk should engage in various kinds of bartering, there is an offense of expiation involving forfeiture. In case a king or one of the service of a king or a Brahmin or a householder should send a robe fund for a monk by a messenger saying, having got a robe in exchange for this robe, spoke thus to the perfectly enlightened one. There are, fortunate one, wilderness roads with little water, with little food. It is not easy to go along them without provisions for the journey. It were good, fortunate one, if the perfectly enlightened one allowed monks provisions for the journey. Then the perfectly enlightened one on this occasion, having given reasoned talk, addressed the monks, saying, I allow you monks 5 products of the cow, milk, curds, milk butter, or buttermilk with little water.
Are you still there, Samantha?
With little food, it is not easy to go along them without for a journey. Husked rice for him who has need of husked rice. Yeah, still reading. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I just had a bunch of impermanence here, trying to figure out where you're at.
Okay.
See, you're probably reading off.
Yeah, okay. I'm the perfectly enlightened one. I'm down to the milk curds.
The milk curds. Okay. Down here.
I allow you monks to. Yes, I'm reading off my iPad, so yes, that's about where I am. Okay.
Okay.
Husked rice for him who has need of husked rice. Kidney beans for him who has need of kidney beans. Beans for him who has need of beans. Salt for him who has need of salt. Sugar for him who has need of sugar. Oil for him who has need of oil. Ghee for him who has need of ghee. There are monks, people who have confidence and are believing. These deposit gold coins in the hands of these who make things allowable, saying, by means of this, give the master that which is allowable. I allow you monks thereupon to consent to that which is allowable. But this, monks, I do not say, that by any method may gold and silver be consented to, may be looked about for. Now on that occasion, the members of the king's company had assembled in the royal palace and were sitting together when the following conversation arose. Gold and silver are allowable for the ascetics following the Sakyan sun. The ascetics following the Sakyan sun consent to gold and silver. The ascetics following the Sakyan sun accept gold and silver. Now, on that occasion, Manikulaka, the headman, was sitting in that community. Then Manikulaka, the headman, said to that community, do not speak thus, masters. Gold and silver are not allowable for the ascetics following the Sakyan sun. The ascetics following the Sakyan sun do not consent to gold and silver. The ascetics following the Sakyan sun do not accept gold and silver. They have renounced jewelry and gold. They have given up the use of gold and silver. And Manikulaka was able to convince that community. Then Manikulaka approached the perfectly enlightened one, paid homage to him, and sat down to one side. Sitting to one side, he reported to the perfectly enlightened one all that had happened, adding, I hope, venerable sir, that when I answered thus, I stated what has been said by the perfectly enlightened one, and did not misrepresent him with what is contrary to the truth. That I explained in accordance with the teachings, and that no reasonable consequence of my statement gives ground for criticism. For sure, headman, When you answered thus, you stated what has been said by me and did not misrepresent me with what is contrary to the truth. You explained in accordance with the teachings, and no reasonable consequence of your statement gives ground for criticism. For Headman, gold and silver are not allowable for the ascetics following the Sakyan Sun. The ascetics following the Sakyan Sun do not consent to gold and silver. The ascetics following the Sakyan Sun do not accept gold and silver. They have renounced jewelry and gold. They have given up the use of gold and silver. If gold and silver are allowable for anyone, the 5 cords of sensual pleasure are allowable for him. If the 5 cords of sensual pleasure are allowable for anyone, you can definitely consider him to be one who does not have the character of an ascetic or of a follower of the Sakyan Sun. Further, Headman, I say this: straw may be sought by one needing straw. Timber may be sought by one needing timber. A cart may be sought by one needing a cart. A workman may be sought by one needing a workman. But I do not say that there is any method by which gold and silver may be consented to or sought.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So we wouldn't be able to end our Pali Canon and English study group without a whole bunch of impermanence. So apologize for those of you guys that are online who maybe got kicked out or weren't able to see the live stream because I lost my battery power here and wasn't able to continue to live stream there for a little bit. But now it's back up and running. So you guys should be able to see everything. What this particular discourse is talking about is where the Buddha did not accept gold and silver during his lifetime as an offering, because that was the currency that was being used at the time. The Buddha lived alongside of his students, that they would invite him into their home. He would live with them in their home, and they would provide everything for him. So he had no need for any kind of currency, because his food, clothing, shelter, and medical care, all the things that were needed in order to be able to sustain his life, were provided for. And you're going to see a discourse here in a moment where he would live up to 4 months and sometimes even longer with his students. So he was well taken care of. So there was no need for any kind of currency at that time. And this would help an individual's mind to be trained not to crave and cling and hold on to material wealth like gold and silver. So that was what the Buddha was able to do 2,500 years ago. And that's how he practiced as being an ascetic. But today, ordained practitioners and teachers, they do accept financial contributions and they do handle currency. And you can actually train your mind to not have craving, desire, attachment, even though there is currency or you're having things that are needed in order to purchase things. But you just need to be very dedicated and diligent to be able to observe your mind and see what it's doing in relationship to these kinds of things. So while the Buddha lived his life in this way without any currency and without even any kind of wealth, he didn't not only accept gold and silver, but he also didn't accept things like land or animals. Sometimes people would offer him slaves or women or things like this. And women, I think 2,500 years ago, for some people, they were kind of thought of as property. And the Buddha didn't think of it that way. And he didn't accept these kinds of things. And he didn't accept slaves and things of this nature that were also considered to be property at that time. So the Buddha never accepted those kinds of things. He only accepted food, clothing, shelter, and medical care because that's what he needed in order to be able to sustain his life and be able to help the people to be able to learn the teachings. Where today people will accept financial contributions, but anybody who's choosing to do that, you're going to need to be sure you train your mind not to have attachment, not to long and yearn for offerings from your community. And that when you do receive offerings, that you use a certain portion of that to be able to sustain your life. But then those offerings should be coming back to the community by way of classes and opportunities to learn and facilities to be able to learn in, maintaining temples and things of this nature. So that's essentially what the Buddha is talking about through this discourse and helping you be able to see that. And there's other people who are talking here as well. When they're talking about people who follow the Sakyan Sun, they're actually talking about the Buddha, because not everybody knew he was a Buddha during his lifetime. Just like if there was a Buddha now, not everybody would know that that individual is an actual Buddha. So they would refer to him either as aesthetic Gotama or master teacher Gotama, These are ways that they would refer to him as. Some people refer to him as the Sakyan son because that's the clan or the family heritage that he had. So if you see him referred to as the Sakyan son, that's actually referring to the Buddha because he was a son of this clan or of this group of people. Some people, of course, refer to him as the perfectly enlightened one or the Buddha, but not everybody referred to him in that way. So this is just a discourse to help you see that the Buddha didn't accept things of material wealth. And there's other discourses like this too, where he talks about not accepting land and animals and slaves and women and things of this nature. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this discourse. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like.
In a dining hall. I allow you, monks, if there is a reason, to go away, having asked permission from the monk immediately next to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. So this is a short little discourse to help ordained practitioners understand that the Buddha gave thanks to the people who made offerings to him. Oftentimes, I see ordained practitioners accepting offerings, and they don't even say thank you to the household practitioners who are making offerings to them. And then they wonder why the household practitioners don't continue to come to the temple and continue to support the temple. Well, if an ordained practitioner is accepting offerings from a household practitioner, this individual has gone out and worked to a certain level of amount of effort and energy to be able to acquire those resources and then give it to an ordained practitioner or a teacher or a temple to be able to help build up the community. And if the ordained practitioners and teachers aren't even saying thank you, just something basic as that, just saying thank you and I appreciate your kindness and generosity and things of this nature, why would anybody ever choose to make an offering again? Right? Now, an individual who makes an offering, they should do so without any expectation of anything in return, including a thank you. But it's really wise for people that are accepting offerings to say thank you. And you'd be surprised that there's ordained practitioners who are taught or teachers who are taught that they're above the household practitioners and that they don't need to respect household practitioners. But then those individuals are going to wonder, why aren't household practitioners supporting our temple? Why aren't they supporting me as an individual? Because if you're not practicing the wise way that the Buddha taught, then you're going to see that you're not going to have the support you need as an individual or as a temple. So here, an ordained practitioner can see that the Buddha indeed recommended that individuals do say thank you for offerings that are being made, because here he's talking about being in the dining hall where the food would have been offered by the public, and now the public, the household practitioners are there, and he's saying, hey, you can say thank you to these people. Because it would be unwise to think that you're above the household practitioners, because they go out and they work really hard for the resources they have. And now if they're willing to share it with you, it would be wise to say thank you. So this is helpful for anybody who is an ordained practitioner or a teacher who's accepting offerings. But it's also important for household practitioners or anybody who's making offerings to not expect a thank you, that you're practicing generosity to enhance the quality of your mind. It trains your mind to let go. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So I'm going to move to the next chapter. This is chapter 85. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Samantha, go ahead, ma'am.
An invitation to accept. When a monk is not ill, an invitation to accept a requisite for 4 months may be accepted, unless there be a renewed invitation, unless there be an ongoing invitation. If one should accept for longer than that, there is an offense of wrongdoing. Okay,
thank you, Samantha. What this is for ordained practitioners, that when individuals invite you into their home, he's teaching that unless you're ill and you're sick, that you should only accept an invitation to be able to stay at someone's house for up to 4 months. And after that, it would be important for there to be a renewed invitation. This is essentially a way of teaching the ordained practitioners not to wear out your welcome. Because if people are inviting you into their home and they're taking care of you, to just sit around for, months upon months and years upon years without having a renewed invitation, or if you were sick, then you need to be able to know to move on. And this is to ensure that someone isn't just sitting around and absorbing all these offerings, but instead that the people that are really interested in having you there, because the ordained practitioners, not only the Buddha, but his students would live right alongside of his students. They would be invited into their home, and that's where they would stay. They also had monasteries and temples to be able to stay at, but oftentimes one of the best ways to help a student to learn is to live right alongside of them. And a teacher living alongside of their students could actually help them in detailed ways that it's not possible by just being in a classroom. There's plenty that you can learn in a classroom, and you can get to enlightenment this way. But going into someone's home as a teacher or traveling alongside of your students, like I just did for 2 weeks in India and Nepal, this will actually help those individuals to get a lot of deep understanding of how to practice the teachings through their life, because the teacher can see how they're interacting with others and how they're functioning on a day-to-day basis. So that's what the Buddha and his students actually did. His ordained practitioners would live right alongside their students. But the Buddha was making sure that they understood that there needed to be an invitation and not to exceed that 4-month period unless there was a renewed invitation or if they were ill. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Okay, I don't see any questions. So now we go to chapter 86. Would someone like to read this? Okay, looks like Pat. Go ahead, sir.
Responsibilities of a teacher. Monks, when a cattle worker possesses 11 factors, he is capable of keeping and caring for a herd of cattle. What 11? Here, a cattle worker has wisdom of form. He is skilled in characteristics. He removes flies' eggs. He dresses wounds. He smokes out the sheds. He knows the watering place. He knows what it is to have drunk. He knows the road. He is skilled in pastures. He does not milk dry, and he shows extra veneration to those bulls who are fathers and leaders of the herd. When a cattle worker possesses these 11 factors, he is capable of keeping and caring for a herd of cattle. So too, monks, when a monk possesses these 11 qualities, he is capable of growth, increase, and maturity in the teachings and discipline. What 11? Here a monk has wisdom of form. He is skilled in characteristics. He removes flies' eggs. He dresses wounds. He smokes out the sheds. He knows the watering place. He knows what it is to have drunk. He knows the road. He is skilled in pastures. He does not milk dry, and he shows extra veneration to elder monks of long standing who have long gone forth, the fathers and leaders of the community. And how is a monk skilled in characteristics? Here, a monk understands as it really is thus. An unwise person is characterized by his actions. A wise person is characterized by his actions. It is in this way that a monk is skilled in characteristics. And how does a monk smoke out the sheds? Here, a monk teaches the teachings to others in detail as he heard it and learned it. It is in this way that a monk smokes out the sheds. And how does a monk know the watering place? Here, from time to time, a monk approaches those monks who are learned, heirs to the heritage, experts on the teachings, experts on the discipline, experts on the outlines, and inquires of them. How is this, venerable sir? What is the meaning of this? Those venerable ones then disclose to him what has been disclosed, clear up what is obscure, and dispel his perplexity about numerous perplexing points. It is in this way that a monk knows the watering place. And how does a monk know what it is to have drunk? Here, when the teachings and discipline proclaimed by the Tathagata are being taught, a monk gains inspiration in the meaning, gains inspiration in the teachings, gains joy connected with the teachings. It is in this way that a monk knows what it is to have drunk. And how does a monk know the road? Here, a monk understands the Noble Eightfold Path as it really is. It is in this way that a monk knows the road. And how is a monk skilled in pastures? Here, a monk understands the 4 foundations of mindfulness as they really are. It is in this way that a monk is skilled in pastures. And how does a monk not milk dry? Here, when dedicated, household practitioners invite a monk to take robes, alms food, lodgings, and medicines and provisions for the sick, A monk is moderate in accepting donations. It is in this way that a monk is not milk dry. And how does a monk show extra veneration to those elder monks of long standing who have long gone forth, the fathers and leaders of the community? Here, a monk maintains bodily, verbal, and mental acts of loving kindness, both openly and privately, towards those elder monks of long standing who have long gone forth, the fathers and leaders of the community. It is in this way that a monk shows extra veneration to those elder monks of long standing who have long gone forth, the fathers and leaders of the community. Possessing these 11 qualities, a monk is capable of growth, progress, and fulfillment in these teachings and discipline. Here, only 8 of the 11 factors are shared, as is 8 applied to generosity and gratitude. See the included reference for the entire teaching. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pat. So here, this is another discourse for individuals who are choosing to be teachers. And here the Buddha is relating these 8 things towards people who are cattle workers, because people who were living during that period of time would have understand farming. And he's using analogies that would help people to understand his teachings based on those analogies. So he's talking about these cattle workers and how these individuals would be skilled in certain things. And I think you can understand all of these things that the Buddha is describing. He's describing it very straightforward. If you have questions about any of these, you can let me know and I will help you to be able to understand it. But I'm just going to go down to this one, at least, where he talks about not milk drying. What he's talking about here is that as students are making offerings to you, it's important that as a teacher, an ordained practitioner, anybody who's accepting offerings, that you don't just take. It's the responsibility of the student to build the practice of the middle way and related to all things, including the practice of generosity. But because a student's mind is not typically in the middle, they're making their way towards the middle way, there are some situations where students might actually overextend themselves in terms of offerings. And it would be wise for a teacher to be able to make sure they check in with their students to be sure that it's possible for them to make whatever offerings that they're making. If a student is, say, having difficulties with their financial resources or otherwise, and they're continuing to make offerings to a teacher, it would be wise for a teacher to check in with that person from time to time and make sure that they're still able to offer those particular offerings. Because again, a student's mind is not typically in the middle. So there's been multiple occasions where students I know of that are making offerings to me, and maybe a regular recurring monthly offering. And I also know that they're having challenges with finances, and I will check in with them and make sure that it's still possible for them to be able to make that offering. And maybe they should reconsider and allocate that money or those resources to something else that could potentially contribute to the building up of their life. So this is really important for a teacher, that they're not doing what the Buddha is describing here as milk drying. Because if you milked a cow and just kept milking it and milking it and milking it and dried it up, then it's not going to produce any more milk. And in order for a student to be able to get to enlightenment, they're going to need to be whole as an individual. Whereas if their resources are so depleted that they don't even know where their next meal's coming from, so to speak, or something along those lines, then it would be very hard for them to experience peace and joy of that enlightened mental state. So a wise teacher would make sure that they're not milk drying their students, and that they would make sure that the individual is able to offer whatever it is that they're offering. And you might need to check in with people from time to time, because a teacher would know their students fairly well about certain challenges and struggles that they're experiencing, and then be able to use that to be able to check in with them in terms of them making offerings, to ensure that the offering that they're making is actually something that they're able to do. And maybe you need to counsel them or guide them to bring their generosity more to the middle. And then ultimately, the Buddha down here is also talking about paying respect and veneration to people who are actually well steeped in the teachings. All too often nowadays, people have really high egos, and they will be around people who actually deeply know the teachings and are very familiar with the teachings, may even be enlightened themselves. But now these new students are coming in and they're being disrespectful and impolite and unkind to these individuals who actually are able to help them in significant ways to be able to progress on the path to enlightenment. Those individuals, oftentimes their ego is up so high, they just think that they know everything that there is to know about the teachings of the Buddha, when their mind actually isn't enlightened themselves, But when they're coming in contact with people who actually know the teachings better than them, they're not actually benefiting from the ability to learn from that individual because they're being disrespectful. And an individual who's either enlightened or close to it, when students come around who are being unkind, unfriendly, and disrespectful and impolite, they're not going to teach that individual because it doesn't make sense to teach that individual, because anything you teach them, it's not getting into their mind and it's not actually helping them because they're not choosing to learn. They're being unkind, unfriendly, and disrespectful in that situation. So in order to be able to get these teachings from an individual who's wise and who understands the teachings, you're going to need to actually have a certain amount of politeness, kindness, friendliness, and respect. Because remember, anybody who's truly teaching these teachings in the way that the Buddha taught, they're not going to be having a price for you to pay. You're not paying for a service. They're actually just teaching you out of the kindness of their heart with loving kindness and compassion. They don't want anything from you or they expect anything from you. So the only thing that's keeping this relationship viable is respect and politeness in both directions, where the student is being respectful of the teacher and the teacher is being respectful of the student. And now that wholesome relationship can yield beneficial results for the student, and that they can learn the teachings that it takes for them to be able to get to enlightenment. So that's why the Buddha is guiding students and teachers too to be respectful to each other. And this is what's going to help to maintain healthy relationships between a student and a teacher. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this one. I only went through 2 of these because I think you guys are familiar with these others. But if you have questions on these others, please let me know. I'll be able to help you. You can put your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So now I'm going to go to chapter 87. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, Samantha, go ahead, ma'am.
Who should you not teach, and who should you teach? Monks, someone with 6 features is unable to enter the sure path with regards to skillful qualities, even when listening to the true teachings. What 6? When the teachings and practice proclaimed by the perfectly enlightened one is being taught, they are not interested to listen. They do not actively listen. They do not apply effort to understand. They learn the incorrect meaning. They ignore the correct meaning. They adopt views that contradict the teachings. Someone with these 6 features is unable to enter the sure path with regards to skillful qualities, even when listening to the true teachings. Someone with 6 qualities is able to enter the sure path with regards to skillful qualities when listening to the true teachings. What 6? When the teachings and practice proclaimed by the perfectly enlightened one is being taught, they are interested to learn, interested to listen. They actively listen. They apply effort to understand. They learn the correct meaning. They ignore the incorrect meaning. They adopt views that match with the teachings. Someone with these 6 qualities is able to enter the sure path with regards to skillful qualities when listening to the true teachings.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. Chrissy, I see your question here. I'll answer that after I describe this particular discourse. I didn't see it prior. So here, what the Buddha is describing is he's describing an individual who would be unwise to teach, and then individuals that it would be wise to teach, because the teachings of the Buddha need to be received by an individual where that individual is pulling the teachings into their life. The teachings of the Buddha aren't pushed into somebody's life, but a student needs to pull those teachings into their life. And if an individual isn't interested to listen, they don't actively listen, they don't apply effort to understand the teachings, they learn the incorrect meaning, they ignore the correct meaning, and then they adopt views that are contradictory to the teachings, that individual isn't actually actively learning and developing on the path to enlightenment. And an individual who's enlightened, they're going to be making wise decisions about where to spend their time and what to do in their day-to-day life. And an individual who's teaching, they're either going to be enlightened or very close to it. And if somebody's not interested to listen and they're not actively listening and doing these other things that the Buddha is describing here, that individual who's enlightened, who has the ability to help others get to enlightenment, they're not going to waste their time with somebody who's not interested in listening to the teachings. So it would be unwise to actually teach someone who meets any of these 6 criteria here that the Buddha is describing. But when somebody has these 6 criteria, the Buddha is saying that this would be wise to be able to teach this person, that they're interested to listen, they actively listen, they apply effort to understand the teachings, they learn the correct meaning, they ignore the incorrect meaning, and they adopt views that match with the teachings because they investigate the teachings, they independently verify them, and now they know the truth, and they adopt views that are matching that wisdom. So in this situation, you have an active student who's readily interested. The student could talk with the teacher, like if they feel like their respect no longer is there for the teacher, and maybe they've even been disrespectful to the teacher in the past. Any teacher who's either enlightened or very close to it, they're not going to be discontent when their students are disrespectful. This happens from time to time. And a teacher who's enlightened understands that that unenlightened student is struggling and they have certain pollutions in their mind. They are not a perfect being yet. So a teacher would understand that. So if their students are disrespectful occasionally, but that person comes to the teacher and apologizes and acknowledges their unwise conduct and then receives guidance to be able to improve that, that means that individual is cultivating wisdom to improve. A teacher knows that their students are not perfect. That's the reason why they're actually studying the path to enlightenment, because they are not yet perfect. So if someone's disrespectful, all they need to do is be able to acknowledge that for themselves as a student, and then be able to come to the teacher and be able to just apologize to that individual, and then make sure that they've cultivated the wisdom to improve in the future. Now, if somebody is regularly disrespectful, like continuously, over and over and over and over again, then a teacher would just end up going away from that student and choose not to teach that student, because the Buddha is sharing here that it would be unwise to teach that type of individual. But occasionally a student can actually do this. It happens, fairly rarely, but it can happen. But a wise teacher would understand that this is something that is the potential to occur. And then the teacher isn't going to go to the student and try to fix that problem for the student. The student needs to be able to accept responsibility for their own decisions and then take it upon themselves to come to the teacher and actually have a conversation to be able to resolve this. Not because the teacher is higher than the student or better than the student or anything like that, but it's just because the student is the one who is disrespectful in this example. And now the student's going to need to be able to come to the teacher to be able to sort that out. If the teacher is being disrespectful to the student, it's important that the student make sure that they understand what is disrespectful and what isn't disrespectful, because oftentimes a student's mind, having pollution, can perceive something that the teacher is doing to be disrespectful, but perhaps it may not be. So a student could ask questions. If they perceive that the teacher is being disrespectful, they could ask questions, and the teacher should be able to help that student to be able to understand what's happening. And if a student has actually experienced disrespect from a teacher, true disrespect, then the teacher, if they're close to enlightenment, then they would be willing to apologize for that. But if a teacher is actually enlightened, they're not going to be disrespectful to a student. But a student could perceive something as being disrespectful. I've had students occasionally just kind of like maybe once or twice in my entire teaching to think that something that I was doing was disrespectful. But they very rarely will actually come and talk to me about that. They usually get angry and bitter and harsh and kind of lash out at me because of their own cravings, desires, attachments, rather than just talking about the situation and to be able to resolve it so that they can either gain the wisdom that they need in order to be able to see that this thing wasn't disrespectful, or to be able to help that teacher if the teacher is truly being disrespectful, for the student to be able to explain that. But I have never been disrespectful to any students, even though there's been one or two students over the years that perceive that disrespect. If they were actually to talk to me rather than getting angry and bitter and hostile and harsh, they would actually be able to see that there wasn't any disrespect there. So Chrissy says, thank you here. And then she's adding some more. She says, to clarify what to do when a student has an interest to listen and learn, but respect has been broken. Okay, I think I answered that for you. And what if the student feels the teacher was disrespectful? Okay, I've just shared that with you too, Chrissy, to be able to help you there, that it would be wise to have a conversation. And then, would you feel it is disrespectful to laugh at a student? Well, a student who's experienced a teacher laughing, that student might actually adopt the view that the teacher is laughing at them, where that's just a perception that the student is holding on to. That it might not be that the teacher is laughing at the student, because that's the mind's personal existence view, thinking that this teacher is potentially laughing at the student. Whereas if you talked with the teacher, you might find out something very different, that they weren't laughing at the student, that they could have been laughing at some other thing that you're not familiar with, you're not aware of, if you haven't actually asked the teacher what it is that they're laughing at. What the mind's going to do is it's going to form perceptions in the unenlightened state. What a perception is a view or opinion that may or may not actually be true. And this view or opinion that may or may not be true, the mind oftentimes will cling to it. And when it clings to that view or perception, it will then experience discontentedness because of it. And now the individual will lash out at the individual that they perceive that the problem is coming from, where what would be wiser is to be able to have a conversation, to be able to understand what is actually transpiring. Because whatever your perception is that has occurred, it may or may not even be true. It's just a perception that you're having. So unless the teacher has said, I am laughing at you, then you are just forming a perception in that situation. You don't truly know what the individual is truly laughing at. And now Chrissy is saying, do enlightened beings laugh when helping someone who is hurting? It's potential. The hurting that is an individual that is experiencing the hurt that they're experiencing is coming from their own mind. There's certain craving, desire, attachment that they're experiencing. I use laughter in occasions to be able to help people redirect their mind. And this actually helps to be able to help an individual to let go of whatever is actually hurting them. So a student can have an expectation of how a teacher should interact with them. And now if that expectation isn't being met, the student can get angry and frustrated and irritated or annoyed. But it's important that you don't have any expectations of how a teacher should function with you, that you don't have this longing, yearning for them to function in a certain way. Because a wise teacher might be doing things that are actually helpful for you without you even realizing that it's actually helpful for you. But the mind, again, is going to cling to perceptions. It's going to have certain expectations of their teacher. You could have craving, desire, attachment towards your teacher. And now the mind is causing this pain to itself, but is perceiving these painful feelings as being caused by the teacher, when in reality, the teacher could just be trying to help you redirect your mind to something else by using some laughter instead. So it's helpful to be able to ask questions rather than just assume that a teacher who is laughing at you. Because anybody who chooses to share these teachings without any expectation of anything in return from their students, they're doing so out of loving kindness and compassion. They would like to see their students to be able to grow and develop on the path and be able to get closer and closer to enlightenment. So you need to be able to start with wholesome intentions and be able to see that a teacher who's sharing these teachings without any expectation of anything in return has wholesome intentions, that they are practicing loving kindness and compassion just to be able to share the teachings. But you might not understand every single thing that a teacher does. I just got back from this trip to Nepal and India where I was traveling with 15 people. And there were various things that I was doing in order to be able to help the students. And sometimes they didn't understand those things that I was doing early on in our trip. But by the middle of the trip, they started understanding what I was doing, and they were really appreciative of the things that I was doing, and it was helping them tremendously. And they had never traveled with a Buddhist teacher before to be able to understand that this is how a Buddhist teacher operates, is that when they're traveling, they're going to help their students to be able to see some of the challenges that they were having. But initially, based on their perceptions and the way of that they're used to, they didn't understand 100% of what I was doing and why I was doing it. Because an enlightened being's mind functions very differently than an unenlightened being. And those unenlightened beings might need to ask somebody to be able to understand what it is that they're doing. And then when they ask questions, they can understand more fully. But when the respect is broken down to the point where the student is being bitter and hostile and harsh with the teacher, putting expectations on the teacher, wanting the teacher to be a certain way, and then being angry and bitter and harsh that they haven't done things their way, then there's no ability for that teacher to be able to help that student any longer, because the student isn't putting themselves in a situation to actually learn and grow and develop from that teacher. Let me see what else Chrissy shares here. She says, I understand, David. Thank you. I find sometimes laughing helps me let go. I find I'm doing this when my children misbehave and they have expressed it hurts them. So thank you for the patience and time answering my questions. Yeah, you're welcome, Chrissy. I've used laughter quite a bit. My wife and my son, they've had various challenges over the years, and I use laughter, and my wife has even started doing it now too, to be able to help in certain situations. And, and like I mentioned, anybody who's sharing these teachings without any expectation of anything in return, they're doing it out of loving kindness and compassion for their students. So you need to always keep that in the forefront of your mind, because students can very easily form expectations of their teacher, and they can cast those expectations on the teacher, expecting the teacher to function the way that the student wants them to function. But remember, a student's mind still has pollution in the mind, and what they want a teacher to do isn't necessarily what a teacher is actually going to do. Oftentimes, a teacher does exactly the opposite of what the student wants in order to be able to help their mind to let go of that craving, desire, attachment. But at the end of the day, it's helpful to make sure what you're working with is you're working with a teacher who has loving kindness and compassion, having the only interest that they have is to be able to see you do well and to see you improve your life and become more and more peaceful and more joyful, with more and more love in your own life. And that teacher would need to have a certain amount of love for each one of their students in order to be able to share these teachings in the way that an individual would, without any expectation of anything in return. So wherever you're confused or you're having challenges to be able to see any particular aspect of what a teacher is doing, just ask that person questions. And then through that conversation, they can be able to help you, where even though the mind maybe wants to be bitter and hostile and harsh towards that person, because the mind is perceiving these painful feelings as coming from the teacher, when in reality it's coming from your own mind, if you set aside that bitterness and harshness and hostility, you can have a really meaningful conversation and a discussion to be able to solve anything that's being experienced. Because I suspect that if anybody's having this kind of issue where they're being bitter and harsh and hostile and disrespectful to a teacher, there's probably other people in their life that they're doing those same things with as well. And they're struggling in those relationships as well. And the way to actually resolve this is to, in a situation where you perceive that there's problems in the relationship, particularly with a Buddhist teacher, if that teacher is either enlightened or close to it, they would be able to have a nice conversation with you and be able to help you work through your difficulties of being able to have a peaceful and harmonious discussion with somebody to resolve the challenges. And now when you get used to having that meaningful conversation to resolve the challenges with the teacher in a very patient and calm way, now when you learn how to do that, it's essentially rewiring the mind to now be able to do that with maybe your children or your life partner or your parents or your neighbors or people like that. Because if you're having difficulties in those relationships too, it only makes sense that you have those same difficulties in a relationship with a teacher. But you'll never overcome those difficulties in those relationships if you don't take the opportunity to be able to practice resolving conflicts that you're experiencing or your perceived conflicts. So it would be wise for you to have a conversation with somebody to be able to resolve any kind of conflicts that you're seeing in your own mind. And then let's see, one more thing here. She says, one more question. I'm sorry. At that point, when respect is broken and expectations have arisen, is it best to go away? It's wise to step away from a relationship or from interaction, because once your craving is arising and your mind's trying to put expectations on that person, it's best to step away from the relationship for a period of time, whether it's a few hours, a few days, a few weeks, a few months, or whatever it is, to let the mind calm down and train to let go. because now you can come back to that individual and you can have a conversation with them, and your mind can be calm and peaceful, polite and respectful. As long as you allow the craving, desire, attachment to reside in the mind, it's going to be difficult for you to have that conversation that you need in order to be able to resolve what's going on in your own mind. So yeah, stepping away from the relationship for a period of time can be helpful. But if it's an individual who you look to be able to get help, like a Buddhist teacher and a mentor, if you've received guidance that is going to be helpful from this individual in the past, it would be unwise to fully walk away from the relationship entirely and never go back, because that's an individual who's been able to help you in various situations. If you step away for a period of time to calm your mind down, train your mind to let go of craving, desire, attachment, then coming back can actually be really helpful, because now your mind's prepared to be able to have a better discussion than maybe you've attempted to do in the past when there was craving, desire, and wants and expectations in the mind. Okay, let me see if we have any questions anywhere else. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere else. So let's go to the next chapter, which is chapter 88. Would somebody like to read this one? Okay, looks like Pat. Let's go ahead with Pat. Go ahead, sir.
Reasons why business surpasses forecasts or fails. Venerable Sir, 1. Why is it that for one person here, the business he undertakes ends in failure? Why is it that for another, the same kind of business does not fulfill his forecast? Why is it that for still another, the same kind of business fulfills his forecast? And why is it that for still another, the same kind of business surpasses his forecast? 1. Here, Sariputta, someone approaches an ascetic or a Brahmin and invites him to ask for what he needs, but does not give him what was requested. When he passes away from here, if he comes back to this world, whatever business he undertakes ends in failure. 2. Someone else approaches an ascetic or Brahmin and invites him to ask for what he needs. He gives it to him, but does not fulfill his needs. When he passes away from here, if he comes back to this world, whatever business he undertakes does not fulfill his forecast. 3. Someone else approaches an ascetic or Brahmin and invites him to ask for what he needs. He gives it to him and fulfills his needs. When he passes away from here, if he comes back to this world, whatever business he undertakes fulfills his forecast. 4. Someone else approaches an ascetic or Brahmin and invites him to ask for what he needs. He gives it to him and surpasses his needs. When he passes away from here, if he comes back to this world, whatever business he undertakes surpasses his forecast. This, Sariputta, is the reason why for one person here, the business he undertakes ends in failure. For another, the same kind of business does not fulfill his forecast. For still another, the same kind of business fulfills his forecast. And for still another, the same kind of business surpasses his forecast. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pat. So here, what the Buddha is talking about is someone who goes to an ascetic or Brahmin and asks him, what is it that you need? And then when this individual shares what he needs, he does not give him what was requested, right? So in this situation, what the Buddha is saying is if they come back to this world, whatever business that they have, it's going to end in failure, right? Because the Buddha is saying that this is an unwise thing to do. Whereas if you go and you ask somebody, what do they need in terms of an ascetic or Brahmin, it would be wise to attempt to fulfill that or explain that you're unable to fulfill it for whatever reason. And then he explains that, if somebody approaches an ascetic or Brahmin and invites him to ask what is needed, but he doesn't fulfill his needs, then when he passes away, his business isn't going to, in the next life, fulfill the forecast of what is potentially going to be able to obtain in that particular business. So this is the cause and effect of the natural law of karma, because the mind of the individual is putting out an invitation to be able to acquire things for an ascetic or Brahmin, but yet they're not actually fulfilling those things. And then someone else approaches an ascetic and Brahmin, invites them what they need, and then he actually fulfills those needs. The Buddha is saying, okay, when you come back to this world, that you'll actually fulfill your forecast in your business. And then he talks about this other situation where this individual surpasses what is actually needed by the ascetic or Brahmin. And then because of that, the business actually surpasses its forecast. So this is something that the Buddha is helping you to be able to see with cause and effect in the natural law of karma. What I suggest you to do is that if you ask a teacher or an ascetic or Brahmin, what do they need? That you already have a plan for a certain amount of resources, maybe that you're going to contribute. And then when somebody shares with you what they actually need, then you can have a conversation about, what is it that you're capable of fulfilling. I've had certain situations from students over the years where they'll come to me and they'll say, hey, David, what can I do to help you? And I'll share, maybe one small thing that they can do to help. And they'll say, okay, great, I'm going to help you with that thing. And then I actually don't ever hear from them ever again. And for me, I'm completely peaceful and joyful in this situation because I never had a craving and longing, yearning for that. But for that individual, it's unfortunate that they would kind of extend an offer like that to somebody and then actually not actually fulfill it. Because if they were working with any other kind of person, like maybe a boss or a coworker or a neighbor or something like that, more likely than not, that person's going to have craving, desire, attachment. Now, when they don't fulfill that, that person is going to experience painful feelings, and they're going to attribute those painful feelings to that person. And they're either going to push that person aside, be bitter, harsh, and hostile to them, or they're going to start putting their expectations on that person and trying to control them. So the person that talks to an ascetic or Brahmin or anybody else and kind of is leaning towards, making this offering to someone, it would be wise for them to either fulfill that or to talk about why it's not possible for them to fulfill it. And in this way, there aren't any expectations that are formed in the other person's mind. Because if that person isn't enlightened, they're going to start having certain expectations. And this is going to cause difficulties in the relationship. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter 88. Okay, I don't see any questions. So I'll go to this last chapter for this class in the entire Pali Canon and English study group. Would somebody like to read this one? Okay, looks like Samantha. Go ahead, ma'am.
8 causes and conditions for the destruction of families. I remember 91 eons back, Headman, but I do not recall any family that has ever been destroyed merely by offering cooked alms food. Rather, whatever families there are that are rich, with much wealth and property, with abundant gold and silver, with abundant possessions and means of subsistence, with abundant wealth and grain, they have all become so from giving, from truthfulness, and from mental discipline. There are, Headman, 8 causes and conditions for the destruction of families. Families come to destruction on account of the king, or on account of thieves, or on account of fire, or on account of water. They do not find what they have put away, or mismanaged undertakings fail, or there arises within a family a spendthrift who squanders, dissolves, and wastes away its wealth, and impermanence is the 8th. These are the 8 causes and conditions for the destruction of families. But while these 8 causes and conditions for the destruction of families exist, if anyone speaks thus of me, the perfectly enlightened one is practicing for the elimination of families, for the misfortune of families, for the destruction of families. If he does not abandon that assertion and that state of mind, and if he does not let go of that view, then according to his own consequences, he will be, as it were, dropped off in hell.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So here, this is a discourse where the Buddha is describing the 8 reasons why families are actually destroyed and they fall apart. Because some people during the lifetime of the Buddha were actually blaming him for the destruction of families, because there were people that were leaving out of the household to be able to learn with him. And now maybe people perceive the destruction of the family based on this person leaving the household, where in reality that's not true, because this individual getting to enlightenment would be the very best thing for them and countless people, including their family as well, because they would be able to have access to someone who's actually enlightened. So the Buddha is giving the 8 reasons why families actually come to an end or are destroyed. That families come to an end and are destroyed on account of the king, or today we might think about the government coming in and kind of, taking certain resources or things like that, and this can destroy a family. On account of thieves coming in and stealing, fire or water, this is kind of disasters that happen to a family and destroy their wealth and their residence and things of that nature. They do not find what they have put away. So if they've saved up resources and they've put it away somewhere, that they don't find it, because nowadays we have banks and safety deposit boxes and things like that. But in the old days, they didn't have that kind of stuff during the lifetime of the Buddha. So they would kind of maybe bury it in the forest somewhere. And if they didn't actually find those things, what they put away, then that could strain their wealth and their ability to sustain themselves as part of the family. Mismanaged undertakings fail. This is mismanaging like business ventures and things of that nature. There arises within a family a spendthrift, someone who's spending the money and wasting the wealth. That's going to destroy a family as well. And then, of course, just due to impermanence, things change and families fall apart. That's one as well. So the Buddha was helping people to be able to see that it's not his teachings that are destroying families. He's actually building up the community through sharing this wisdom. But oftentimes people's perceptions are that somehow the teachings of the Buddha are destroying families. But he actually had instituted something that people couldn't ordain with him unless they actually had the approval of their family, whether they had a wife or a husband, or whether it was their parents or their children. They would all need to agree that they could actually go off in order to ordain with him, because his own father actually came to him and begged and pleaded to not ordain any other people as part of the royal family. And Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, he realized that this was unwise to just ordain people out of a household, because families could actually be, taking away from this individual by ordaining with him. It could be taking away someone who's responsible for keeping the family afloat. So the Buddha instituted guidance that if somebody would like to ordain with him, that they would need to have the support of their family. And that practice is actually still in practice today here in Thailand, that if you are interested in ordaining, you actually need to have the support of your husband or your wife or your children, your parents, people like this, so that those people can essentially let go and they can choose to allow this person to go off and actually become ordained. So here the Buddha is showing the natural law of cause and effect of what actually leads to the destruction of families. And he's saying here that if somebody actually has the view that it's his teachings that are actually leading to the destruction of families, that they would actually end up being reborn in the hell realm. And the reason why is because he would be reborn in the hell realm. So let me know what questions you guys have here. This is the very last chapter of our book series and of the Pali Canon and English Study Group. So it looks like Samantha has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Yes. Under the comment that you made about the family members having to, kind of give permission for someone to become ordained, in that time, and I guess even in current times, if that permission is not given, does it just mean then that that person can become a household practitioner and then continue on their journey to enlightenment, but not take on the full lifestyle of an ordained practitioner?
Yes, that would be the case. But also another option is that individual who aspires to ordain could actually talk to their parents. They could talk to their spouse or their children if they have children, and try to help that person through any attachments that is holding on to them and not allowing them to go ordain as well. But ultimately, if those people aren't allowing that to occur and they're adamantly against this individual ordaining, then the Buddha, in nowadays too, they wouldn't actually ordain that person, because they know that the family is holding on and they're struggling and they're having difficulties with this person leaving the home. So a wise teacher wouldn't ordain someone who actually has relatives like that are still holding on. So yes, they could continue to journey on the path to enlightenment as a household practitioner and actually make their way to enlightenment, or they could also consult with their family over multiple months and years and maybe help them to be able to let go so that they can have the confidence that their family's not going to fall apart by them choosing to ordain. Maybe there's certain financial responsibilities that this person can fulfill, or maybe there's other people in the family that can perform the responsibilities that the family members are looking for this person to fulfill. So that ensures that they're not just walking out of the home when things get difficult and go ordain and kind of walk away from their family, but instead that they have conversations with their family and they make sure that everybody's okay for them to go off and ordain.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, let me check one more time if we have anything anywhere else. I don't see anything anywhere else. So what I'm going to do is end this Pali Canon and English study group with a big thank you to all of you, whether you're in class today or you're listening to this on the recording. Thank you so much for this 1.5 years of studying the original words of the Buddha to be able to help you learn and grow and develop on the path to enlightenment. There's been many students over this 1.5 years that have been coming and going in and out of this program. And I'd like to just thank everybody for reading, for questions, for attending, for participating, for actively learning and growing and developing and implementing these teachings into your day-to-day life, because this is helping you, it's helping those close to you, and it's helping all of humanity as you're learning, growing, and developing on this path. I would also like to thank you for any generosity that you've practiced to be able to allow me to host this program, because while I offer these teachings at no cost, it actually does cost to be able to share these teachings in terms of all the technology that I use and the software and services that I use to be able to share these teachings. So thank you to anybody who shared any generosity with me to be able to actually host this program. So thank you for all of that. And as a way of me showing my appreciation, gratitude, and respect for you and the support that you've given me, I'm continuing to teach that next week on Saturday. I'm going to be starting the Pali Canon and English study group from the very beginning, where we're going to be starting with kind of an introduction to the Pali Canon and English study group, just for like maybe 20-30 minutes. But then we're going to actually move right into volume 2, chapters 1 through 10, because that's where the Pali Canon and English study group starts. So if you would like to restart this program from the very beginning, not that you have to start from the beginning, but it's kind of nice that it is starting on January 10th. You can start right from the very beginning of this program. And I'll probably start that program with a thank you for everybody joining, because I really appreciate whenever anybody chooses to learn and practice these teachings, because it's the very best thing that you could ever do for yourself, those close to you, and all of humanity. So thank you for everyone who's participated in any way in this program. And I'm going to keep teaching from this point forward. And not only is the Pali Canon and English really write down every single little detail that it takes to be able to get to enlightenment. That's why a real live teacher is important. Someone wouldn't be able to just read books to get to enlightenment. But in terms of what you do need to read, in terms of text, this book series contains everything that is needed. So there isn't going to be any additional text in terms of sharing additional discourses. There's plenty of other discourses out there, but I know with 100% certainty this collection of discourses will lead to an individual's enlightenment, and then they're going to need to study those inside and out and know them well, and then they're going to also need to have personal guidance from a teacher as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome. All right, so I'm just going to end by inviting you guys to any of our future classes, courses, and retreats. And again, just thanking you for any participation that you've been involved in with our program. And perhaps I'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Take care and be well. Have a lovely rest of your day. Sawadee-khap.
Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.